Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another quick deck overview, this time with Gruul Midrange in the Pioneer format. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative Pioneer-based videos, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, and leaving a constructive comment down below, maybe letting us know what deck you might like to see us cover next. As well as don't forget to check out our other channel, the Modern channel, MTG Nexus, where we do very similar things for modern decks and top 5 modern lists. So, Gruul Midrange is a deck very similar to the old Chonky Red decks. It is a value-based, Gruul-based deck that is more trying to play a mid-range battle cruiser game, battle cruiser magic, rather than a more aggressive deck like the the Gruul Bushwhacker decks that we've covered a couple weeks ago. This deck is seeking to leverage vehicles like Esika's Chariot and Skysoverign to be able to compete with mid-range decks like Rakdos Midrange in particular, while also having kind of enough of an aggressive slant that with a little bit of disruption you can have game against mono green. You get to play the 2 best 1-drops in the format in the form of Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves, hoping to accelerate into a 3-drop either Lovestruck Beast, Bone Crusher Giant, or notably Reckless Stormseeker, which allows you to turn on your vehicles, allow them to attack quicker, especially if it's flipped over into Storm Chaser or Storm Charge Slasher. As far as interaction, this deck plays some amount of removal spells. This particular build playing Strangle, as it fits in the curve a lot better, but is sorcery speed number 1 and number 2 doesn't deal 4 or 5 damage, which can be important against things like Old Growth Troll and some other things. Scavenging Ooze is played as a 4 of in this particular build, simply because it's very good against Greasefang, and also decent against decks like Is It Phoenix, etc., to be able to chew away at their graveyards, and can have some role plays against blue-white control, eating things like Memory Deluge and such. The rest of the deck, obviously you're playing the 2-color mana base. You get to play a bunch of man lands. This one's choosing to run Lair of the Hydra and Mutavault. No Den of the Bugbear here, as green is obviously the card you want to leverage in the early turns to be able to cast your Elvish Mystics to accelerate in your other plays. You also get to play, obviously, Boseiju and Zukenzen, and then, you get to leverage the new Carpolucent Forest, which makes the Gruul mana a lot better. It actually was this deck has seen some amount of play previously, not necessarily this build. Gruul saw some play in the early portion of Pioneer, especially after the huge wave of bannings with, like, Dimir Inverter and all that, but, just proved to be a much worse deck in the face of things like Winota and such, and now has just come to the point where it's actually a playable card, especially with the mana getting a little bit better. Sideboard, you're playing Rending Volley. This is primarily against Greasefang, although it does have applications against Mono Blue and Bant Spirits. Cindervines is an interesting one. You use this primarily to blow up vehicles, or to attack enchantments out of something like Enigmatic Incarnation decks. Or you can use it to blow up potentially things against blue-white control, while also punishing them for playing non-creature spells. Nissa's Defeat is an interesting one. A lot of the more recent lists have moved away from this. It's primarily a way here to deal with Old Growth Trolls or Cavalier of Thorns out of green-based decks, or just outright killing something like Kiora. The Akroan War is a card that has actually started to see some main deck play. Mainly it's here against decks like Mono Green. Be able to steal their big dumb idiot, beat them to death with it, and then it dies before they get it back. Xenagos the Reveler, just a little bit more insurance against more mid-range and control decks like Blue-White Control and Rakdos. And the nice part is you get to play Gigantha the Wellspring as yet another kind of card advantage spell against kind of these grindier mid-range based decks. Alright, another version that has popped up that is similar but vastly different with what it's trying to execute is this kind of pseudo combo variant with Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Combat Celebrant, allowing you to make these copies of Combat Celebrant, take a bunch of combat steps in a turn, kind of giving you this combo-ish finish to the deck. You're not playing as many Skysovereigns, which makes you probably a little bit weaker into Rakdos Midrange, which is one of the hallmarks of playing this deck. Is Skysovereign is probably the single best card against the Rakdos Midrange lists, being able to kill a bunch of their different plays while also being able to threaten their life total, kill their planeswalkers, etc. Obviously, Esika's Chariot here still is a 4 of. Beyond that, you are seeing a copy of Mizian Mortar, which I think is a little bit better removal than something like Strangle, but doesn't fit into the early curve as well. Beyond that, obviously, you're still playing Bone Crusher Giant as a little bit of an additional interaction with Stomp. Reckless, Stormseeker, and Combat Celebrate both threaten to end the game very quickly with their respective abilities. And then, you're still playing 23, 24 lands, as you absolutely need to hit your first several land drops and be able to cast your elves in a timely fashion. Sideboard, things are a little bit different with this variant. Alpine Moon's primarily here for Lotus Field combo, or you could also play it against other different decks, but Lotus Field is the main one that you need a little bit of interaction, as you might be a little bit too slow of an aggressive plan just on its own to be able to get that there. Rending Volley, once again, primarily here for Greasefang, also splash damage against something like Spirit. 2 copies of Unlicensed Hearse and Clothis, very nice when you're expecting to play a bunch of Greasefang and Izzet-based decks. Roast here when you need a little bit more removal, and then a Crone War we've already kind of covered, and then Gigantha the Wellspring as your companion of choice. The final version we're going to take a look at, and one thing I will say about Fable the Mirror Breaker is it has been seeing some play in some of the streamers and such that have been playing this deck. Primarily, I know Doomwake has been playing some of it. It allows you to pitch your extra copies of vehicles. One of the downsides of both these vehicles is they are both legendary, so it does kind of suck when ones get stuck in your hand, but they are so powerful that you're kind of willing to make that trade-off in certain circumstances. This version, obviously, you still see the 8 1-drop elves, 24 lands, but they're electing to play a Lava Coil, which once again is a little bit better into the face of a lot of what you're trying to kill, especially since almost all of this removal is sorcery speed based. You can't really kill a Greasefang in game 1 anyway, so it just makes sense to have your removal be able to kill things like Old Growth Troll or a flipped I think it's Night Pack Alpha, whatever Graveyard Trespasser is whenever it's flipped. Just makes sense to be able to kill those creatures. Scavenging Ooze, we've already kind of talked about its importance. Stormseeker, kind of diminishing in returns along with Skysoverign in this list, to be able to make room for main copies of a Crone War. This obviously something you can do if you're expecting more copies of mono green, and it does free up some sideboard slots against some other based decks. Sideboard. The sideboard in this one is a little bit interesting. End of the Festivities deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. The only 2 decks I could think of that you might potentially want this is early turns against mono white humans. A lot of their creatures come in with 1 toughness, although they don't stay that way for very long. And against elves, once again, they don't stay that way for very long, so this card is very timing specific. Rending Volley, we've already kind of covered this over and over again. Unlicensed Hearse, once again, very good against the various graveyard-based decks that you're playing against, mainly Greasefang, mainly Izzet Phoenix. And it's also a reasonable vehicle you can crew in the mid-game. Cindervines we've already kind of covered, pretty good against any type of enchantment-based decks or any against spell-based decks like Blue-White Control. Nice to have these cards that you can bring in against, border Lava Coils out. Embercleave, when you just need to punch through some damage. I would presume this is mostly another tool against mono green in addition to the Acroan things. I really don't think Nissa's Defeat is kind of the card that you want, but, Embercleave is another card that can kind of hack through those big dumb idiots with, a Lovestruck Beast or a Bone Crusher Giant, allowing you to punch through a Cavalier of Thorns or a Old Growth Troll potentially. This deck has a lot of potential, and I still think people are exploring the particular shell that is best. Mainly the things there people are iterating on is whether you want 23 or 24 lands, what red-based removal spell you want to play in your deck, figuring out the flex slots a little bit. The decks I can see this deck having a problem with are other fast aggressive decks getting potentially under it. So, a deck like Mono White Humans potentially, a deck like the Boros Heroic could also be problematic, or decks that just flat out don't care about what this deck is doing. The biggest one to that would be something like Lotus Field Combo. Now, obviously, Lotus Field Combo is not at the highest of highs at the moment, but however, it is a deck to be aware of. That's why you saw the Alpine Moons out of the sideboard. You do have some counterplay to that deck, but mostly your goal with that matchup is to just get them dead as quickly as possible. Hope they stumble a little bit, and then you can kill them. But this deck is mainly designed to try to play Battle Cruiser Magic with Rakdos midrange, with mono green. I don't know that it's favored particularly in either matchup, but it is certainly a deck that has evolved to kind of counterplay against that. And also have a reasonable matchup against something like Blue-White Control, a deck that has fallen kind of on hard times a little bit with its kind of weird place against mono green and Rakdos. But, a deck you have to know and respect is there are dedicated blue-white mages out there. But, this is a deck another deck you should be aware of. As a friendly reminder, if you do like our content, please consider subscribing to the channel. And don't forget to check out our modern sister channel, MTG Nexus, where we cover Modern in much the same way we do with this channel with Pioneer. Hope to see you for the next video on Thursday, which should be the top 5 Pioneer deck lists this week.